Hashtag no music, no intro. This is our third annual hashtag Saints Twitter podcast that we're doing with the great Tony Pauline of Pro Football Network. If you are kind of a newer fan of the podcast, we did our first episode with Tony Pauline in 2000 in 2020, 3 years ago. So this is like it's every time we do this, our annual episode is kind of like a cap of our anniversary of Ryan and I starting the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us, Tony, and having you on. We really appreciate it. And thank you for helping us kind of recap our little podcast anniversary. It's great to have you on.
Outstanding. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be part of history with you guys, I guess.
Thank you so much. Ryan and I love having Tony on. Even before we had Tony on a podcast, we always followed his work. And Ryan and I have always kind of felt that Tony has great insight into what teams are doing. If you ever listen to him or just read his pro day notes, it just gives you little tidbits of linking teams to certain prospects. He was the first person to really link the Saints to Michael Thomas back in 2018 or 2016. So right off the bat, I'll start with it's a little different because the Saints have the Broncos pick. They're picking so low in the draft, although I don't know if they'll stay there. I do think there may be some attempts for them to move up. But do you have any either positions of who potentially they may be interested of addressing in the draft after having a pretty successful offseason in free agency so far?
I know they signed two defensive tackles in free agency, Nathan Shepard of the Jets, who they gave a huge amount of money to, and Kalen Saunders. But they have been really working the defensive lineman, the interior defensive lineman, hard in the pre-draft process. I know their defensive line, I've reported a couple of times, their defensive line coach been traveling around the nation working these guys out. So, I mean, where we stand right now, it seems to me like it could be a defensive tackle. Ironically, before the combine, when I did a mock draft, I had them take a Mozzie Smith out of Michigan, who's one of my favorite prospects. We'll see what happens the next couple of weeks. But if I had to, take a gamble right now, or I'm going to do a mock draft this weekend, it'll probably be a defensive lineman, interior defensive tackle, despite the fact they signed those two guys in free agency.
Tony, what are your thoughts on this class as far as edge rusher and D tackle, especially when you get to the kind of middle portions of the draft? What are your thoughts on this class overall?
Well, if we look at the defensive tackle class, it's not very. There's not a lot there. I mean, you got Jalen Carter at the top, and then he's going to fall a lot further than we initially thought. You got Brian Brise and then of Clemson, Mozzie Smith of Michigan, and then it really falls off. I mean, it depends on the type of defensive tackle that you're looking for. If you're looking for a one-gap guy, you're going to probably go with Kalijah Cansey of Pittsburgh in round 2, maybe Zach Pickens of South Carolina. If you want the bigger, space eater, guy like Gervin Dexton of Florida in the second round, Sika Ika of Baylor, more third-round type. I think later on in the draft, you may be able to find a gem there, a Nesta Jade Silvera, I should say, of Arizona State by way of Miami. But you're primarily looking at more, rotational type guys. The edge class, obviously at the top, you got Tyree Wilson and Miles Murphy. As far as, your defensive end types, if you're looking at the outside linebacker types, you're talking about Will Anderson and Nolan Smith, who I think is more of a complete linebacker, as well as BJ Ojulari and Will McDonald. I mean, there were some guys later on, especially your 3-4 hybrid outside linebacker pass rushers, Derek Hall of Auburn, Isaiah Foskey of Notre Dame, Nick Hampton of Appalachian State, even much later on, Jose Ramirez of Eastern Michigan, who's going to be a day 3 pick. Who I think you can get, but they're more situational pass rushers as opposed to every down players.
I think it's very interesting. One of the biggest things I think that came out recently is you posted your big board. I believe it was either yesterday or this weekend. And the thing that stood out to me the most is where Kalijah Cansey was on your big board, I guess, in relative to I don't know if you want to call it draft buzz or what have you in terms of after he performed at the combine. You do have uh, I can't pronounce it. The Northwestern defensive tackle whose name I spent all morning trying to perfect and I still can't pronounce it. He was high. He was higher on your board. I feel like a lot of Saints fans think that both players won't be there at 29, but just going off your big board, you think potentially there is a chance for them both to be available at pick 29 or even maybe at 40.
You mean Edamatiba Adewale of
Thank you.
Northwestern. He's more affectionately known as Tommy. I met him at the combine, and everybody calls him Tommy.
Okay.
You know,
I can do Tommy.
there you go. You know, with Clancy, I just don't understand the love for Clancy because I think he's a scheme-specific player. 6'1", 281 pounds. Yeah, he ran a 4.67 at the combine. Good for him. Had that shoulder issue. He's got a labrum issue. He's a smaller guy. He doesn't have great growth potential. He had a lot of production last year, and he was terrific on film last year. But he also played with a good defensive line. If you look at that Pitt defensive line, I mean, they had some terrific players on the edges and on the inside, which kind of helped them and you know set them up in one-on-one blocking. Now, Edabawari or Tommy from Northwestern, he's almost a full inch taller at 6'1.5". He's a few pounds heavier. And oh, yeah, by the way, he ran a 4.49 40 rather than a 4.67. And he had a great vertical jump. He had a great, you know, he's much more athletic. I think the problem for Edabawari was kind of played end in that Northwestern line. And he's more of an interior technique type of guy like Cansey. And the talent on that Northwestern line was fractional compared to what you saw at Pittsburgh. So he was asked to basically, he was the only guy out there. So if you're looking at the production, you say, yeah, Cansey. But when you watch the film, you know, you see why Edabawari was at a disadvantage. And the fact is this, I mean, Edabawari was unstoppable during 3 days of Senior Bowl practice. I mean, unstoppable, where for the most part, the offensive line was getting the better of the defensive line. And then he has a great combine. I don't know that. I think if either guy goes in the first round, it'll be Edabawari of Northwestern over Cansey. I think just Cansey's just too scheme specific. You know, Edabawari, you could probably line up at defensive end in a 3-man line in certain one-gap systems. Cansey, I look at as solely a 3-technique tackle, which I think is going to reduce his attractiveness on draft weekend.
Interesting. And as far as edge, so do you have the Texas Tech kid at the top of your board as far as edge goes?
Correct, Tyree Wilson.
Okay. And, you know, how does that board fall as far as, you know, defensive end or edge once you get into, I'm saying the late first round, but I think if the Saints do target someone, I do think they would trade up, you know, maybe to the mid rounds. Is there any player you think that'll be available in the mid rounds that can really be a good edge player and you know, maybe a potential starter kind of immediately? Because the Saints really have a huge need on the defensive line, really all across the board.
You mean mid rounds, not mid first round?
I mean mid first round. I'm sorry.
I mean mid first round. You know, it's kind of, you know, where do you take Nolan Smith? And is Nolan Smith are you using him as an edge, which I think is a misuse of him because I think he's such an outstanding 3-down linebacker prospect. It really falls off. I mean, you know, BJ Ojolari of LSU. Are you going to use him as an edge rusher in a 4-3, or is he a 3-4 outside linebacker? Right? It's really Keon White of Georgia Tech. You know, is he an edge rusher at 6'5", 285 pounds? He's a real good player. He's a darn good player. I don't think there's any need for them unless somehow, you know, say a Miles Murphy tends to start to fall down the draft boards and they fall in love with him. And I think Miles Murphy of Clemson would be an outstanding fit for them to really make a move up. I mean, last time they made a move up for an edge rusher, it didn't really work out all that well.
Oh boy. It did not. And you say that, and one of the biggest things that Ryan and I was hoping the Saints didn't do this offseason was bringing back Marcus Davenport, which kind of just tells you how we felt about him as a player in his tenure with the Saints. Since I do get just kind of talking to people who are know with the team, that the Saints do want to add an offensive weapon early-ish in the draft, whether that be round one, whether that be round two. I know there seems to be this want to, surround Derek Carr with more weapons. I can't get a sense if it's a wide receiver, if it's a tight end, if it's a running back. But I get that need. What's the most intriguing player right now for me is Jackson Smith-Njigba of Ohio State. I know at Ohio State's pro day, I know that you reported the Giants and the Saints, met extensively with him. I have an inkling that maybe the team fell in love with him, but obviously he would be way out of their range. What's your opinion on him as a player? Because not this past season, but 2 seasons ago, I felt like he was even a better prospect than Chris Olave, and I love Chris Olave as a prospect. This year was kind of very muddled for him. So just I know a lot of Saints fans have him on their mind just in regards to Smith-Njigba.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I don't think he's going to fall down to them. They're going to have to, that'd be a player they have to trade up for. I'd be shocked if Smith-Njigba gets past the 21st pick of the draft. I tend to doubt that he's going to get past the Los Angeles Chargers, which is a team in dire need of a wide receiver. But I would agree with you. I mean, getting off the 2021 film, I actually had Smith-Njigba rated higher than C.J. Stroud. Because of his play in 2021, it was so outstanding. And really, one of the players who suffered because of Smith-Njigba's play in 2021 was the aforementioned Chris Olave, because C.J. Stroud was not really looking towards Chris Olave.
Right.
He was looking so much towards Smith-Njigba, who, is a terrific receiver. He's not a true vertical threat. I mean, he's not a guy that's going to, he's not a Jalen Hyatt type, although Jalen Hyatt's having his problems now, but he's much more rounded. He runs tremendous routes. The footwork and the route running that I saw during Pro Day was absolutely fantastic. Marvin Harrison, if you read my reports, Marvin Harrison was also at that Pro Day catching passes from C.J. Stroud. And you could see a stark difference in the way that, Smith-Njigba would get in and out of his routes crisply with speed. He wouldn't lose any momentum. He was always on balance, where Marvin Harrison Jr., who everyone believes is going to be a top 12 pick in 2024, would have to throttle it down, would have to gather himself and get in and out of the breaks. So, I think that would be an excellent additional target for Derek Carr. Team up with a former Ohio State alum in Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. I mean, you'd have a Buckeye trio there. I think that's something they have to consider. I also think that the need is so great at tight end, and Carr has worked well with tight ends in the past, that, if they are in love with a guy like a Dalton Kincaid of Utah, a Luke Musgrave of Oregon State, and they really feel that either of those guys are worthy of that selection at 29, I think that's also a direction that they would have to look, because again, I don't think Smith-Njigba really is going to last that long.
Speaking of tight end, it seems like Michael Mayer's quote unquote draft stock has been kind of all over the place. He was considered a pretty highly touted coming out, but now I'm starting to see him kind of slip to the second round and stuff like that. Is that because of the athletic? Like his athletic numbers aren't as, outstanding or eye-popping as others?
Well, I mean, he ran a 4.7 at the combine. So,
right.
Luke Musgrave ran a 4.61. Darnell Washington ran a 4.64. So he doesn't show himself to be the downfield threat that a Dalton Kincaid of Utah is, or Luke Musgrave is, even a Tucker Kraft of South Dakota State, who I really like a lot. Yeah, Mayer is your traditional, 3-down tight end. 3rd and 5, he can run a 6-yard flare for you, or he can block for the quarterback. 3rd and 2, he can run the 4-yard route and catch the pass in a crowd, or he can block and help the running back gain those 2 yards. He is not the true down. He doesn't present himself as a true downfield threat. I'd be shocked if he gets in the second round, because he is so good at everything, where, Dalton Kincaid isn't a bad blocker, but it's not his forte. Luke Musgrave barely blocks. And I think Michael Mayer does everything so well. He just doesn't have you talk about athleticism. I say he doesn't have the highlight reel that, say, a Dalton Kincaid or a Luke Musgrave has. I still think, I have him as tight end 1. he could be tight end 3 because the top 3 guys, Mayer, Kincaid, and Musgrave, are really bunched closely together on my board.
What I think a lot of since we're just on the topic of tight ends, a lot of Saints fans like this idea of potentially drafting Darnell Washington, whether it be 29 or 40, and kind of because how good he is as a blocker. Probably I just in the limited film I saw of him, he came off as a better blocker than an actual like receiving tight end prospect. Obviously Brock Bowers has a lot to do with that, and a lot of weapons that Stetson Bennett had. What's your opinion of him as a player in this tight end class? Because the tight end class in this draft appears to be a much better group of players than say the wide receiver class in the limited film I've watched this season.
Yeah, it's deeper. That's for sure. And I think there are more potential starters. As far as Darnell Washington's concerned, I wouldn't take him in the first round. I mean, he is sort of Michael Mayer-ish in the sense that, he is an offensive tackle size player playing the tight end position.
Right.
He was 64 at the combine, but as I had reported early on, after that championship game against TCU, when he initially went to combine training, he was 280 pounds, and they got him down to 260. And, he moves incredibly well. He is a good pass catcher, but the thing is, he's not a fast guy. I mean, if you're saying that Michael, even though he ran the 40 slightly faster than Michael Mayer at the combine, he doesn't play it like that. He plays like a big lumbering guy who is really not effective more than 8 or 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. The thing is, he's 6'6.5". He's like a really big power forward on the football field, and that people will be jumping on his back. He'll still make the reception, but he's not going to make those catches, 20 yards down the field for you. So you're going to have that. You're going to have that sort of offense where you're not relying on your tight ends to get into the secondary, to create those mismatches for you to like Darnell Washington. I think, he obviously is a legitimate next level player. He does have the speed limitations. He does have quickness limitations. You're just going to have to design. You don't have to design your system around it, but you're going to have to know that there are limitations, as to what you're going to do. There's going to be the positives where if it's 3rd and short, you put him on the line of scrimmage, he's going to be like a 6th offensive lineman. Or if it's 3rd and 3 and you throw him the ball in the middle of a crowd, he'll go up and get it, but you're not going to get the 20, 25-yard play down the field from him on a consistent basis.
Kind of switching gears to quarterbacks. It was reported earlier this week that the Saints were bringing in Hendon Hooker on, one of their visits. So it kind of sparked a big debate on, if he's there at 29, should the Saints take him, even though they, just paid Derek Carr a bunch of money. There's things I like about Hendon Hooker, and there's some things I do kind of wonder about, his age, kind of coming from a simplistic offense, very little drop back, with the age. How long will it take with the injury? How long will it take for him to kind of get in the groove?
You should have a bit of maturity in life as far as that's concerned. And, we've seen quarterbacks play well into their 30s and be productive. I mean, Derek Carr's 32 years old now? And look what the Saints just signed him to. So the age really doesn't bother me. As far as Hendon Hooker is concerned, he is my 3rd-rated quarterback. He's always been my 3rd-rated quarterback. I had him ahead of Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. And you look at Hendon Hooker, I mean, he played better in 2021 than he did in 2020 when he was at Virginia Tech. He played better in 2022 last year at Tennessee than he did in 2021. And he did a lot of great things at Tennessee. They beat Alabama, if you remember. And he had that program really going in the right direction with a brand new coach before he hurt his knee. And I really think that the knee injury in the long term is beneficial to him because he's going to have to sit on the sidelines and observe and absorb what's going on. He's not going to be put in a position where he's going to be thrown on the field and asked as a rookie to carry a team on Sunday. So I like everything about Hendon Hooker. I like his play. I like the fact that he's going to have to basically sit on the sidelines. I don't know. I think he's more of a 2nd-round pick. I think the only way he ends up in the 1st round is if a team at the top of round 2 wants to get a quarterback and they trade back up into round 1. As far as the Saints are concerned, I mean, good for the Saints for doing their due diligence. I'd be surprised if they take a quarterback within the first 2 rounds, maybe first 3 rounds, based off of the money that they just gave Derek Carr.
Yeah, it's something I would be absolutely shocked about if they went that route. But I am very curious of like how much of it the draft buzz, and maybe this is kind of maybe agent based. The last couple of weeks, there's like this huge like Hendon Hooker is going to go round one. He may go top 10, top 15. Is there legitimate belief in the league that he could be drafted that high potentially?
No, not that I've heard. I mean, it
Right.
was Mike Tannenbaum who said, I think he said that the Seahawks were going to take him with the fifth pick of the draft. I don't see him as a top 20 selection. I mean, yeah, there's value, say, getting him late in the first round because you get that fifth-year option on him. So I understand that. But if you're taking a guy, in the top 12 picks, top 15 picks, you expect him to start as a rookie and you expect him to, produce for you as a rookie. Hendon Hooker's not going to be able to do that by virtue of his knee injury, which is what, but I think that knee injury will lend to some good things for him, some beneficial things for him, 2-3 years down the road, because he's not going to be able to start as a rookie.
One question we got from our listeners, one of our good friends in our Discord community, his name's David. He has a man crush on Josh Downs. Um, I I watch a little of him. I see the infatuation with him, but I keep coming back to like he is so ridiculously small um at that position, and I feel like maybe it's just past experience. Like I felt like I got burned with Tavon Austin back in the day. Loved him as a prospect. That didn't work out, so maybe I'm projecting that on Josh Downs. How do you view him as a prospect, and do you see his size as being something that's going to push him down draft boards?
You mean Tavon Austin of West Virginia?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Tavon Austin of West Virginia was a top 12 pick. And no one's projecting Josh Downs as a top 12 pick, never mind a first round pick. I think it's actually would be a pretty good fit because of the fact that you've got you got a bigger receiver there in Michael Thomas. You got a nice size receiver there in Chris Olave. So a guy like Downs, you can line up in the slot and use him as a return specialist. And you're going to take him. He's not going to go first round. I have him as a second rounder. So, you could potentially take him somewhere in the second round area if you really feel that strongly about him. He's got decent vertical speed, catches the ball very well. The size or the lack of size is an issue. You're just going to have to, do things where you line him up in the slot, you line him up off the line of scrimmage, and you get him away from press coverage. To get a free and clear release from the line. But I think in this case, I understand, what you're saying about Tavon Austin. I was never in the Tavon Austin camp, even though for the longest time they said the New York Jets or the Jets here in New York where I'm at, we're targeting him. But again, it's a different situation because Austin was selected so early and was expected to produce, and a lot was put on his shoulders, and he was never that type of player. Never mind the fact that he came, he played for West Virginia, which I don't remember was the Big 12 or the Big East at the time. But it wasn't really that great of a conference.
Ryan, it's time to tell the listeners a secret.
Yo,
the infamous picture of you going viral on social media, sweating in the white shirt, looking confused. What people don't know is before that picture was taken, you had just mowed the lawn in the hot New Orleans heat.
Yep, sweating.
Don't know about you, but if you want to avoid becoming a meme and avoid becoming a viral hit on social media, I think instead of you mowing the lawn, there's a company out there that got you covered. That is Ground Up Landscaping Services. They service the greater New Orleans area. We've seen their work in person at the hashtag Saints for the Podcast meetup. The backyard area was outstanding.
Yeah, we know the owner of this company. He's an outstanding person, a really good dude. And look, I've seen pictures of his work done all around New Orleans. Beautiful work. Everything he takes care of, him and his crew, and he's good, honest, and on time. If you want to visit them, visit www.groundupnola.com, and you get the book a free quote. And these guys are licensed and insured. So this is not some, shade tree, guy to come cut your grass. These are dependable business business professionals that will take care of your lawn. And they do beautiful work that you can check out on their Instagram and Facebook. They'll make your garden space spectacular from the ground up.
And another position the Saints, we kind of hoping that they focus on is the running back position. There's a ton of running backs in this draft. Where do you think the run begins? I know Bijan Robinson is kind of considered the first one to go. Some people think you go in the mid-first round, but then after that, it's like, where does this thing start? Do you think it's more of a second to third round run where most of these, top-level running backs go?
Yeah, I think second, third, fourth, and even fifth round, you'll have a lot of running backs come off the board, and there will be a lot of good backs. It depends on what you want. I mean, Zach Charbonnet of UCLA is my third-rated back, and he plays with a violent style. He plays with a old school sort of mentality where he'll run over defenders, but he's also got tremendous short area quickness and the ability to bounce around defenders and create yardage. Plus, he's an exceptional pass catcher out of the backfield. And then if you want the smaller creative back, you're looking at a Tyjae Spears of Tulane, who I think is ridiculously underrated. A Devin Aiken of Texas A&M, who creates his own yards and is very explosive. Later on, you got guys like an Evan Hull of Northwestern, who I think is going to be a real good back at the next level. Ran much faster at the combine than people thought. He's a tough ball carrier. Also catches the ball well. I think there'll be a lot of good backs in rounds 2, 3, 4, and even 5. It's just a matter of what type of running back are you looking for. Are you looking for that creative ball carrier? Are you looking for the guy that's going to grind it out on the inside? Are you looking for a little bit of both? And obviously, in this day and age, you want somebody that can catch the ball out of the backfield.
With that said, speaking of running backs, one of my few prospects that I really feel is like I have one of my draft crush, as I usually refer it to year in and year out, is Gibbs from Alabama. What's interesting to me is just finding a place in a team that would potentially draft him in the first round. Do you get a sense that he is going round 1 somewhere in the draft?
I personally love Jahmyr Gibbs. He's my number 2 rated back. I mean, I love his speed. I love his creativity. Exceptional pass catch out of the backfield. Not the biggest guy in the world. So, third and short, you're not going to hand them the ball in those goal line situations. I think in my first mock draft, I had him going to the Eagles with their second pick, the 30th pick. I think it all depends on how early Bijan Robinson goes.
Ryan's little just was perfect.
If Bijan Robinson goes earlier than expected, you could see Jahmyr Gibbs land in the late part of round 1. Otherwise, I think he'll be off the board the early part of round 2. Now you got to tell me what you were laughing at.
Well, just the Gibbs going to Eagles. That just makes my stomach hurt. I would love him for the Saints. I would hate for him to go to the Eagles. But another prospect that keeps coming up, I've been hearing this kid's name.
I think I retweeted a tweet from the 33rd team that talked about Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I've written about him. I've also done the show that I do with Trey Wingo 2 weeks ago. I talked about him. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is on best football 2 years earlier than when he entered the draft, because oftentimes those guys are never able to get it back. So Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I mean, I think it's a disservice to call him an RPO quarterback, yet he is a guy who is lethal carrying the ball. He's got the speed, he's got the explosion, he's got the ability to multi-cut and carry the ball almost like a running back would. And he's a terrific passer. He's a developing passer. He's got a great arm. He can make all the throws. I like the way he showed much better pocket poise last year, and he did a great job reading the field. We actually interviewed him at the Shrine Bowl at length, and I can understand why he comes off as aloof to some people, but when you really speak to him, you know that he's an intellectual guy. He's very thoughtful. He thinks before he speaks, and he's actually an artist, he told us. And I was actually very impressed with him. And when I watched the film, I was like, wow. I mean, I can understand why more and more people like him. And I was told at the combine somebody said to me he's going to go day 2, and I was like, that's a load of crap. There's no way he's going to go in the second round. He's going to go day 2. That's not going to happen. But then somebody from UCLA, who was at UCLA Pro Day, says, you know what? Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to be the best value at the quarterback position because somebody's going to grab him late in round 3, early in round 4. They're not going to need him to start right away. He's got great tools. He's got great upside, and he's going to be drafted likely by a team that needs a quarterback 2 or 3 years down the line, and he's going to be allowed to develop. And the team that keeps coming up is actually the Minnesota Vikings. I posted that this morning, or I retweeted that this morning on Twitter. Seemed to gain a lot of steam. So yeah, there's a lot there to like with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And I was a detractor. I was like, this is just a guy who's a running back trying to play the quarterback position. And when I watched the film, after I talked to him, after I watched him at the Shrine Game, and after I watched the film, I was like, my initial opinion on him was wrong. Really got to change that because, he has got a lot of ability as a passer.
Interesting.
Yeah, I live in LA and saw a lot of a lot of few of his games being that he is in UCLA. So he's a project, but if you just watch the games like you said and watch his tape, you can absolutely see the appeal and the traits that is very desirable in the NFL. The last question.
Let me just say that, and I agree with you. He's a project, but he's a project that you're going to take in the 3rd or 4th round. You know what? Right. Anthony Richardson is also a project, but he's going to be selected with the 3rd or 4th pick. I mean, so you understand what when I was told that Dorian Thompson-Robinson could be the best value in the draft, value at the quarterback position in the draft.
Can you? I guess something that Ryan and I. Obviously, we haven't been in the draft game as long as you have, but we've been huge draft nicks for 10 plus 15 plus years. The Anthony Richardson rise is one of the most fascinating things I've seen this draft cycle in quite a long time. Just in the terms of a prospect, if you just potentially go by his tape, at best, even with all his traits and being an insane athlete, you're thinking like late round 1.
Okay, hang on a second. We lost you there, or at least I lost you. I heard you about draft Nick, and then you said Anthony, and it sounded like you were going to say Richardson, and then go into something, and I didn't hear a word about it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. There's been connection issues. My internet's being dumb this morning. Ryan can edit it. It's fine. Just Anthony Richardson being a prospect that after he finished at Florida, even with his traits, at most, if you're being just completely unbiased, he was more like a late 1st round pick, round 2 pick. So seeing this more like just this skyrocket, and now he's probably a lock to be top 5. It's baffling to us. And just, can you walk us through like how we've gotten here?
You and me, brother. That's for sure. What happens is this. And I agree with you. I've said all along that, he's got so much of a bust factor. I wouldn't take him before the 3rd round. But what happens is, especially in the lead up to the draft, is the coaches start to get involved. And in the scouting community, what they usually do is they will look at what a guy does well. And when you're looking at Anthony Richardson, you're looking at an incredible athlete with a huge arm that can make all the throws. And coaches say, well, listen, we have this guy who's 6'4.5", he's 235 pounds, he runs a 4.4 in the 40, he can jump through the roof, and he can throw the ball a country mile. We're going to teach him to read defenses. We're going to teach him to throw the touch passes. We're going to teach him pocket poise. He has all these great traits, and we're going to teach him to be a passer. What boggles my mind is you look at history, especially the history of the quarterback position, hasn't worked out like that. They take these big arm throwers and these guys completely bust. I mean, completely bust. And you look at Anthony Richardson, I mean, he doesn't have a big body of work. He was never a great quarterback at Florida. I mean, heck, they lost to Vanderbilt last year, and they got pummeled by Florida State, and he completed 30% of his passes. But what Frank Reich, who really likes Anthony Richardson, is looking at is he's got this big guy who can play in or outside the pocket, can pick up yards with his legs, can get the ball, 50 yards downfield with a flick of his wrist. and he's got all these great physical traits. And the coaches, whether it be Frank Reich or whoever, or say, well, you know what? We're going to teach this guy to be a great quarterback because he's got all these incredible traits and all these physical skills that we can work with. That's what football coaches do. They coach football. And that's why you see a guy like Anthony Richardson make such a meteoric rise, to the top of the draft. I agree with you. I mean, and history has proven, people like you and I, right. They keep reaching for these quarterbacks. Jameis Winston, right? I mean, Jameis Winston, never came close to meeting expectations. And we can go on and on and on. Going back to the days of Ryan Leaf, there were people who thought that Ryan Leaf was a better quarterback prospect than Peyton Manning because of his arm strength. And that turned out to be a complete disaster. But what they're looking at is they're looking at the physical traits. And they're like, you know what? We are going to teach this guy to be a quarterback. We're going to teach him to be an NFL passer. And at the quarterback position, it's usually boom or bust.
Yeah, that kind of boggled my mind. And it's just funny, like me and Adam, we would talk about it. Like somebody like Will Levis, he would have been he was like your quintessential pick, like top quarterback, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. Just kind of that tall, statuesque quarterback, throw from the pocket, big arm. And now it's like, I don't know where he goes in this draft. I don't know where he falls. Like it seems like he's falling, but I don't know where.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like the conversation we had earlier about Michael Mayer at the tight end position. Michael Mayer, 20 years ago is a top 15 pick. Bijan Robinson, 25 years ago, is in consideration to be a top 5 pick. I think it's a little bit different with Will Levis, though. I think Will Levis he's got a big arm, and he's more than happy to showcase that big arm at the expense of being able to make the underneath passes with touch and place the ball. And you see him in at the combine, you see him at the pro day, you see this muscle bound guy, which is not a good thing. I mean, teams think that he's a little bit stiff, he's a little bit tight, too tight. But what you don't see is, the fact that he struggles reading defenses, the fact that, he can throw the ball 85 yards, but, oftentimes he's way off the mark. Again, I mean, Will Levis is my 5th rated quarterback. After your top 2 guys, Stroud and Bryce Young, after Hendon Hooker, after Anthony Richardson, then Will Levis. And I think Will Levis is sort of another version of Anthony Richardson in that he's going to be overdrafted. I think, I think when you look, at the middle part of round 1, Washington, even if he makes it down to Tampa, I think that's really a good spot for Will Levis. I am not sold on the fact that if 3 quarterbacks go, if a team trades up with the Arizona Cardinals to secure Anthony Richardson, I don't know that the Indianapolis Colts are going to take Will Levis with that 4th pick.
One draft thing that can happen on draft night that could be surprising, whether it be round 1, day 2, just one draft thing that may happen that's going to surprise people.
It's a good one. Bottom of round 1, we talked about Edibawari potentially going bottom of round 1. I think Will McDonald going the bottom of round 1 could happen. I think 2 guys that everyone is mocking as first rounders, Cam Smith, the cornerback from South Carolina, and Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver from Tennessee. I think there's a chance that both of those guys fall out of the first round. In fact, I'm willing to say that it's about a 10% chance right now that Cam Smith, the corner from South Carolina, who was highly rated in the early portion, I would be surprised if he goes in the first round.
Interesting. Oh, that's all I got. Adam, you had anything else?
No, I don't. And even if I did, I don't think my internet was going to let me right now. So thank you so much, Tony. We really appreciate it for giving us so much of your time. Make sure you follow Tony on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Check out all his work, his pro day write-ups, his big board is out at Pro Football Network. Thank you so much, Tony. We greatly appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me, and I'll speak with you guys next year.
All right.
Thank you, Tony. Have a good one.